Rain hammered against the stone courtyard while Anne Brennan tried to keep her balance on the slippery ground. Her twisted leg made standing difficult on good days, and today was far from good. Around her, the nobles of House Brennan gathered in their finest clothes, protected by servants holding umbrellas over their heads. Nobody held an umbrella over Anne. Her father stood on the raised platform, reading from a scroll in his booming voice. Lord Richard Brennan was a tall man with a thick beard and cold eyes that never looked at Anne with anything but disgust. Today he was announcing her fate to everyone who mattered in the kingdom of Rothdale. By ancient treaty and sacred duty, House Brennan provides tribute to the Lord of Smoke who dwells in the volcanic lands beyond our borders, her father declared. This year we offer my daughter Anne, who has reached her 17th year, and heard whispers ripple through the crowd. She knew what they were saying. Why would anyone send a crippled girl as tribute? The Dragon Lord always received the most beautiful maidens from the great houses. Anne's 3 sisters stood beside their mother under a large silk canopy. Margaret, Catherine, and Jane were all perfect in every way. Their relief was obvious. None of them would be sent away. Anne had known this was coming for weeks. She had seen it in the way servants avoided her eyes and heard it in the hushed conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Her father had found the perfect solution to his problem. He would fulfill his obligation to the Dragon Lord while ridding himself of the daughter who embarrassed him. The priest said Anne was cursed. She had been born with her leg twisted inward, and despite years of painful treatments, it never straightened properly. In Rothdale, physical perfection was considered a sign of divine favor. Anne was living proof that House Brennan had somehow angered the gods. Let the tribute come forward. One of the priests called out. Anne walked toward the platform as steadily as she could manage. She refused to limp more than necessary. Her old nursemaid Rose had taught her that dignity was something nobody could take away unless you gave it to them. The crowd parted to let her through, and Anne kept her eyes straight ahead. When she reached the platform, her father finally looked at her. There was no sadness in his face, only satisfaction. He had solved 2 problems at once, and said nothing. What was there to say? She had spent 17 years being told she was worthless. Perhaps the Dragon Lord would kill her quickly. Thunder cracked overhead as a group of riders entered the courtyard. These were not human riders. Anne had read about the Dragon Lord's servants in her father's library, but seeing them in person was different. They were taller than humans, with scales covering their skin in patterns of green and bronze. Their eyes were golden and slitted like a cat's. They moved with a grace that made even the finest human knights look clumsy. The lead rider dismounted and approached the platform. When he spoke, his voice had a strange musical quality that made the words sound like song. We come to receive the tribute offered by House Brennan. Lord Richard gestured toward Anne. My daughter, as agreed by treaty. The scaled rider studied Anne for a long moment. She forced herself to meet his golden eyes without flinching. She expected disgust or disappointment, but his expression remained neutral. He simply nodded once. She is human and she lives. The tribute is acceptable? Those words stung more than Anne expected. She was acceptable only because the bare minimum requirements were met. She was human and alive. Nothing more. The rider turned to his companions and spoke in a language Anne did not know. 2 of them brought forward a horse already saddled and ready. It was a beautiful gray mare with kind eyes. At least Anne would ride to her fate with some dignity. Before she could mount, Rose pushed through the crowd. The old woman pressed a leather bag into Anne's hands. Practical things, Rose whispered. Warm clothes, good boots, and a knife. Remember what I taught you. And squeezed Rose's weathered hand. Rose was the only person in this courtyard who had ever shown her real kindness. Thank you. For everything. You're stronger than any of them know, Rose said fiercely. Don't you forget that? The scaled riders helped Anne onto the horse. She settled into the saddle and arranged her bag. Her father had already turned away, talking with the priests about something else. Her mother and sisters watched from under their canopy but made no move to say goodbye, and realized she felt nothing about leaving them. How could you miss people who never wanted you? As the riders prepared to leave, the one who had spoken to her father moved his horse beside hers. He spoke quietly, in words meant only for Anne. "The Lord of Smoke does not value beauty as your people do. He sees worth where others see only surface. Perhaps you will surprise them all." And looked at him sharply. "What does that mean?" The rider's expression remained unreadable, but something in his golden eyes seemed almost kind. "It means you should not assume you know your fate, young human. The Dragon Lord has lived for 1,000 years. He has learned to recognize true value." Before Anne could ask more questions, the riders began moving. The horses walked through the courtyard gate and onto the road that led north toward the volcanic mountains. Anne looked back once at the only home she had ever known. The nobles were already dispersing, her father was already walking back to the manor house, and her sisters were already laughing about something with their mother, and turned forward and did not look back again. Whatever waited for her in the Dragon Lord's domain, it could not be worse than spending another day being treated like a mistake that should never have been born. The rain continued to fall as they rode toward the mountains, but Anne barely noticed. She was thinking about the rider's words, true value. What could a dragon possibly value in someone like her? The volcanic mountains rose from the earth like jagged teeth trying to bite the sky. Anne had been traveling for 6 days, and each day brought them closer to the heat that shimmered in the distance. The scaled riders spoke little during the journey, but they were not cruel. They made sure Anne had food and water, and they slowed their pace when her leg began to ache from long hours in the saddle. On the 7th morning, they reached the entrance to the Dragon Lord's domain, and expected a cave or perhaps a fortress with high walls. What she saw instead made her breath catch in her throat. The stronghold was carved directly into the side of an active volcano. Massive crystalline structures jutted from the rock, glowing with inner light. Bridges made of what looked like black glass connected different levels of the complex, and Anne could see figures moving across them. Some walked on 2 legs, while others flew on wings that caught the sunlight. "Welcome to the Ashenhold," the lead rider said. His name was Gareth, and he had been the kindest of the group during their journey. Home of Lord Ash and all who serve him. Anne had expected darkness and dungeons. Instead, she saw a city built into living rock, beautiful and strange in equal measure. The heat here was intense but not unbearable. Somehow the crystalline structures seemed to channel it. Making the air warm rather than scorching, they rode through gates that stood 3 times the height of a human. Guards watched from above, but they were not the scaled servants Anne had been traveling with. These were true dragons in their smaller forms, still twice the size of horses, with wings folded against their backs and smoke drifting from their nostrils inside the stronghold, and saw things she had never imagined. Small creatures made entirely of fire danced along the walls, lighting the passages. Lizard-like beings in fine robes carried scrolls and books, deep in conversation. In one large chamber, a dragon in its full massive form lay coiled around what looked like a pool of molten metal, watching over workers who were forging something in the intense heat. Most shocking of all were the humans. Anne saw at least a dozen as Gareth led her through the passages, and they were not prisoners. They wore good clothes, carried themselves with confidence, and seemed to be working alongside the other inhabitants as equals. One woman even laughed at something a dragon said as they walked past. Gareth brought Anne to a chamber with walls made of smooth black stone. A pool of heated water steamed in the center, and clean clothes were laid out on a bench. "Rest here," he said. "Bathe if you wish. Someone will bring food soon. Lord Ash will send for you when he is ready." And stood alone in the chamber after Gareth left, trying to make sense of what she had seen. Nothing here matched what she had been taught about dragons. The priests in Rothdale said dragons were monsters who devoured humans and hoarded gold. But this place was clearly a society, complex and organized. She lowered herself into the heated pool, and the warm water eased the constant ache in her leg. Anne closed her eyes and let herself relax for the first time in weeks. Whatever was going to happen to her, at least she had this moment of peace. A knock on the chamber door startled her. A human woman entered, carrying a tray of food. She was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back and intelligent brown eyes. She smiled when she saw Anne. "I'm Beth," the woman said, setting the tray down. "I was sent as tribute from the Eastern Kingdom 5 years ago. I help run the library now," and stared at her. "You were tribute? But you're alive? You're free." Beth laughed. "Of course I'm alive. What did you think would happen? Did they tell you the Dragon Lord eats humans?" The priest said all tribute maidens were sacrificed to feed the dragon's hunger for human flesh, and said quietly. Beth shook her head with obvious frustration. "I should have known. The kingdoms keep spreading that lie to maintain the fear. Listen, Anne, I'll tell you the truth. Lord Ash has never harmed a tribute. He gives every woman a choice. You can stay here and live as a free person, or he will provide safe passage back to your homeland with gold enough to start a new life anywhere you wish." "Why would he do that?" Anne asked. "Why demand tribute if he doesn't want us?" "The tribute system was established by human kings, not by dragons," Beth explained. 3 generations ago, there was a war between dragons and humans. Many died on both sides. The treaty that ended the war included the tribute clause because the human kings insisted on it. They wanted to show their people that dragons were conquered and dangerous. Lord Ash agreed because refusing would have meant more war, and climbed out of the pool and wrapped herself in the robe that had been left for her. Her mind was racing. "So all those stories about dragons were lies?" "Not all of them," Beth said. "Dragons are incredibly powerful. They can burn armies with their fire and live for thousands of years. But they're not mindless monsters. They value knowledge, honor, and loyalty. Most dragons would rather study ancient texts than fight wars." Beth helped Anne dress in the clothes that had been provided. They were simple but well made, with a special support built into the leg that made walking easier. Anne was surprised by the thoughtfulness. "Did you tell them about my leg?" Anne asked. "I told them a human was coming who might need accommodation," Beth said. "Here, your leg is not something to be ashamed of. It's just part of who you are. The dragon healers have already prepared some things that might help with the pain if you want them," and felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them away. Kindness without pity was something she had rarely experienced. "What happens now?" "Now you meet Lord Ash," Beth said. "Don't be frightened. He's lived long enough to see through pretense and pride. Just be yourself." They walked through more passages until they reached a large chamber lined with books. Anne's heart leaped at the sight of so many volumes. A figure stood with his back to them, studying something on a high shelf. He turned when they entered, and Anne saw the Dragon Lord for the first time. In his humanoid form, Ash was tall and covered in dark scales that shimmered like oil on water. His eyes glowed like coals in a fire, and when he moved, it was with a grace that suggested immense power held carefully in check. Those ancient eyes studied Anne for a long moment. Then Ash spoke, his voice deep and warm like distant thunder. "Your father called you broken. I see only a human who survived what would have crushed weaker souls. Welcome to my home, Brennan. Here you will be judged only by who you are." Dust motes floated through the afternoon sunlight streaming into the great library, and sat at a massive wooden table, 3 ancient books spread before her, and a 4th balanced on her lap. 3 months had passed since her arrival at the Ashen Hold, and she could barely remember the frightened girl who had expected death. She had found her place among the books. The text before her was written in Old Rothdalian, a language most scholars considered dead. Anne had taught herself to read it during long, lonely days in her father's manor, and now that skill made her invaluable. This particular manuscript described human agricultural techniques from 200 years ago, methods that even dragons had never fully documented. "Have you reached the section on crop rotation?" Ash's voice came from behind her and smiled without looking up. The Dragon Lord often appeared in the library without warning. She had learned he was as much a scholar as a ruler, and he genuinely valued knowledge above almost everything else. "Just finished it," Anne said, making a note in her own careful handwriting. They used a 7-year cycle instead of the 3-year method most kingdoms use now. It prevented soil exhaustion and produced higher yields. Ash moved to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder. In his humanoid form, he was not threatening despite his size. Anne had grown comfortable in his presence over the past months. They spent hours together discussing everything from history to philosophy, and Anne found him to be the most interesting person she had ever met. Your translation work has filled gaps in our historical records that have existed for centuries, Ash said. The Dragon Council is impressed with your progress, and felt warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the volcanic heat. Praise from Ash meant something because she knew he never lied. If he said her work was valuable, then it truly was. I enjoy it, she said simply. Nobody ever told me I could be good at something before. You are good at many things, Ash replied. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his glowing eyes thoughtful. Beth tells me you have been teaching some of the younger dragons to read human languages. They are learning faster with you than with any previous teacher, and had not realized anyone noticed. She had started helping a few young dragons who struggled with human grammar, and the informal lessons had grown into regular sessions. Teaching made her happy in ways she had never expected. Dragons think differently than humans, Anne explained. The previous teaching methods were designed for human minds. I just adjusted the approach to fit how dragons naturally process language. Ash leaned back in his chair, studying her. You see patterns that others miss? It is a rare gift, and felt her cheeks warm. Compliments still made her uncomfortable, but she was learning to accept them. The dragon healers had given her a new brace for her leg, and the constant pain that had been her companion for 17 years was finally gone. She could walk through the stronghold without exhaustion, and some days she almost forgot her leg was different at all. I wanted to discuss something with you, Ash said, his tone becoming more serious. I have a request from the human kingdoms. They want to negotiate changes to the tribute treaty. Anne's stomach tightened. What kind of changes? They want to end the tribute system, Ash said. But they are demanding compensation for the perceived loss of honor. That makes no sense, Anne said. You never wanted the tribute system. They forced it into the treaty. Truth and politics rarely align, Ash said with something that might have been amusement. The current king of Rothdale is your father's rival. He sees an opportunity to embarrass House Brennan by revealing that Lord Richard sent a damaged daughter as tribute. And flinched at the word damaged, and Ash noticed immediately. His expression softened. Their words, not mine, he said gently. But the situation is complex. If I simply agree to end the tribute, the human kings will claim I was desperate to do so, which will make me appear weak. If I refuse, they will use it as justification for hostility. What do you want to do? Anne asked. I want your advice, Ash said. You understand human politics better than any dragon. You know how their minds work and what motivates their actions. And set down her pen and thought carefully. This was important, and Ash was trusting her judgment. The idea that a dragon lord would ask for her counsel still seemed impossible, but it happened regularly now. They are testing you, Anne said slowly. They want to see if you will negotiate from a position of weakness. If you simply agree to end the tribute, they will make more demands. But if you offer something they cannot refuse, something that benefits them more than the tribute ever did, then you control the negotiation. Ash's eyes gleamed with interest. Go on, offer them a trade alliance, Anne said, warming to the idea. Dragon metallurgy is far superior to human methods. Your healers know medicine that could save thousands of lives. Your architects could help build structures that would last centuries. Offer to share knowledge in exchange for peace and open borders. Knowledge for knowledge, Ash said. An exchange of scholars and craftsmen. Exactly, Anne said. Frame it as a new treaty between equals, not as tribute from conquered people. The kings get access to dragon wisdom, which will make them more powerful than their rivals. You get to end the system you never wanted while strengthening connections with humans. Ash was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he nodded. It is a good plan? Better than anything my advisors suggested. Will you help me draft the proposal? Of course, Anne said. But there is something you should know. What is that? My father will hate this, Anne said. If Rothdale enters a trade alliance with dragons, House Brennan will lose the prestige that came from providing tribute. He will see it as a personal attack. Will that trouble you? Ash asked, watching her carefully, and thought about the man who had looked at her with contempt her life. The father who had sent her away hoping she would die. She felt nothing but indifference. No, she said. It will not trouble me at all. Something shifted in Ash's expression, something warm and approving. You have changed since you arrived, Anne. You stand taller. You speak with confidence. You no longer apologize for existing, and realized he was right. Somewhere in the past 3 months, she had stopped thinking of herself as broken. She had found purpose, respect, and something she never expected to have. She had found a place where she belonged. This is my home now, Anne said quietly. If you will have me, I would like to stay. Ash smiled, and it transformed his face from ancient and powerful to something almost gentle. I was hoping you would say that. I have grown fond of our conversations. And smiled back, and in that moment, she understood something that made her heart race. The feeling growing in her chest was not just gratitude or friendship, but she pushed the thought away. He was a dragon lord who had lived for 1,000 years. She was just a human girl with a twisted leg. Some dreams were too impossible even to voice. I should finish this translation, Anne said, turning back to her books to hide her confusion. The section on irrigation is fascinating. Ash stood to leave but paused at the door. Anne? I'm glad you stayed. After he left, Anne sat in the quiet library, her heart beating too fast, and wondered what she was going to do about falling in love with a dragon. The sound of shouting echoed through the stone halls of the Ashen Hold, and stood beside Ash's throne in the great council chamber, her heart pounding as she watched her father stride toward them with armed knights at his back. Lord Richard Brennan looked older than she remembered, his beard more gray and his face harder, and forced herself to stand straight despite the urge to hide. She wore the formal robes of a Dragon Council advisor, dark blue fabric with silver embroidery that marked her position. Her new status was clear to everyone in the room, and she could see her father's fury when he recognized her. I demand my daughter be returned to me, Lord Richard announced, his voice booming in the chamber. The tribute agreement has been violated. You were meant to accept her as payment, not keep her as a pet. The temperature in the room rose noticeably. Several dragons present shifted, their scales reflecting light as anger rippled through them. No one insulted their lord in his own hall, but Ash remained calm, his voice steady and cold. And Brennan is under my protection as a valued member of my household. She is not property to be traded between men who see her only as a burden. And watched her father's face turn red. He had not expected resistance. She is my daughter, and she will do her duty to her house. Duty? And heard herself speak before she could think better of it. You mean the duty of staying silent while you treated me like I was cursed? The duty of accepting your disgust every day of my life? Lord Richard turned to stare at her, genuine shock on his face. Anne had never spoken back to him in 17 years. The knights behind him shifted uncomfortably. You will not speak to me that way, her father said. But there was uncertainty in his voice now, and stepped forward, her new brace allowing her to walk without any visible difficulty. I will speak however I choose. I am no longer your daughter to command. I am an advisor to the Dragon Council, a translator of dead languages, and a teacher. I have found worth here that you never allowed me to have. Beth had entered the chamber and stood near, the back with several other humans who lived in the Ashen Hold. They watched Anne with approval and support. Anne drew strength from their presence. This is ridiculous, Lord Richard said, turning back to Ash. I came to discuss the new treaty proposal. Your offer to trade knowledge for peace is acceptable, but only if proper compensation is made for the insult to House Brennan. My daughter's return is the minimum requirement. I am not returning anywhere, Anne said firmly. Her father ignored her completely and continued speaking to Ash. Furthermore, we require access to Dragonfire. King Henry is preparing for war with the Northern Territories, and Dragonflame could end the conflict quickly. and felt sick. This was the real reason for her father's visit. He wanted dragon power to help his king win a war, and he was willing to trade his daughter's life to get it. Ash's voice dropped to a dangerous level. I do not provide weapons for human wars. Then there will be no treaty, Lord Richard said. And I will tell every kingdom that dragons are weak and that your tribute system is nothing but a lie to hide your fear of humanity. One of the knights behind Lord Richard moved his hand to his sword. It was a subtle gesture, but Anne saw it. Her instincts screamed a warning. They are going to attack, Anne said urgently to Ash. Everything happened at once. The knight drew his blade and lunged toward Ash. Anne did not think. She threw herself forward, positioning her body between the blade and the dragon lord. She felt a sharp burning pain across her shoulder as the sword cut through her robe and into her flesh. Then the world exploded with golden light, and fell to her knees, her shoulder burning with pain, but the light was everywhere. It poured from her skin and from Ash's scales, filling the chamber with brilliance. She felt something snap into place inside her chest, like two pieces of a puzzle finally joining together. Suddenly she could feel Ash's emotions as clearly as her own. His fury at the attack. His fear for her safety. His love. His love. The golden light faded, leaving everyone in the chamber staring in shock. Anne looked up at Ash, and his glowing eyes were wide with wonder. She could feel the bond between them now, a connection that went deeper than words or thoughts. It was like their souls had been tied together with unbreakable thread. Beth rushed forward to examine Anne's wound. But the dragon healers were faster. They pressed claws against the bleeding and began working with practiced efficiency, and barely felt the pain. She was too overwhelmed by the bond and what it meant. A soul bond, one of the older dragons whispered. It has been 1,000 years since anyone witnessed a true soul bond. Lord Richard stared at Anne with horror. What have you done? I have not done anything, Anne said, still kneeling on the floor while healers worked on her shoulder. The bond forms only between souls that are perfectly matched. It cannot be forced or faked. Ash moved to stand beside her, and Anne could feel his desire to touch her, to make sure she was truly safe. The bond transmitted his emotions so clearly that it was almost overwhelming. The soul bond is sacred to dragonkind, Ash said, his voice carrying across the chamber. Anne is now my bonded mate. She has status equal to my own, and anyone who threatens her threatens me directly. The implications of those words rippled through the room. Anne, the shunned daughter of House Brennan, now held power that rivaled the Dragon Lord himself. This is impossible, Lord Richard said, but his voice had lost its confidence. She is crippled and cursed. No one of power would choose her. I did not choose the bond, Ash said coldly. The bond chose us. It recognized what you were too blind to see. Anne has more courage, intelligence, and honor in her smallest finger than you possess in your entire being. The knight who had attacked Ash was seized by dragon guards. Lord Richard backed toward the door, his plans crumbling around him. This is not over, he said. The kingdoms will not accept this. And the kingdoms are fools, Ash replied. Now leave my home before I forget that Anne would disapprove of me burning you to ash. As the guards escorted Lord Richard and his knights from the chamber, Anne finally allowed herself to fully feel the bond. Ash knelt beside her, and his hand gently touched her face. Through the bond she felt his wonder, his joy, and his absolute certainty. I've loved you since you first argued with me about ancient farming techniques, Ash said quietly. I have been waiting for you to see yourself the way I see you, and laughed despite everything, tears streaming down her face. I am still just a human with a twisted leg. You are my mate, Ash said. You are brilliant and brave and perfect exactly as you are. The bond does not lie. And leaned into his touch, finally accepting what her heart had known for weeks. She loved him, and impossibly he loved her back. The healing chambers smelled of herbs and something sharp that made Anne's nose wrinkle. She lay on a soft bed while the wound in her shoulder continued to mend. The dragon healers said she would recover fully within days, but that was not what occupied her mind. The bond with Ash filled her awareness like a second heartbeat, Constant and overwhelming. She could feel him even though he was in another part of the stronghold. His concern for her, his anger at the attack, his absolute determination to protect her. The emotions were so strong that Anne had to close her eyes and breathe slowly to separate her feelings from his. Footsteps approached, and Anne did not need to look to know it was Ash. The bond told her he was near, and she felt his relief when he saw she was awake. "How do you feel?" Ash asked, sitting in the chair beside her bed. "Strange," Anne admitted. "I can feel your emotions. It is like having someone else living inside my head." "The bond will settle with time," Ash said. "You will learn to distinguish your feelings from mine. But yes, we are connected now in ways that go beyond human understanding." And turned to look at him. What did my father mean when he said the kingdoms would not accept this? Ash's expression darkened, and Anne felt his anger through the bond before he spoke. "Lord Richard returned to Rothdale and spread lies about what happened. He claims I used dark magic to enslave you, and that dragons are planning to attack human kingdoms. 3 kings have formed an alliance. They are marching here with armies to rescue you." And sat up too quickly and winced as pain shot through her shoulder. "They are going to attack? Because of me?" "They are attacking because they fear what our alliance could mean," Ash said. "If dragons and humans share knowledge and trade freely, the old power structures will change. Some kings prefer war to change." And thought about the armies marching toward the Ashenhold, thousands of soldiers who believed they were fighting for a righteous cause. They thought they were rescuing a helpless girl from a monster. The truth would not matter to them. "There has to be a way to stop this without bloodshed," Anne said. "I am open to suggestions," Ash replied. "The Dragon Council has been debating options for 3 days," and felt the bond throb with information. She was learning that the bond did more than transmit emotions. It also shared thoughts and memories if she focused on them. She could sense Ash's deep desire to avoid war, his frustration with human politics, and his fear that Anne might be hurt in the coming conflict. "Can I fly?" Anne asked suddenly. Ash looked surprised. "What do you mean? Dragons can carry riders, correct? I have seen humans riding dragons during training exercises. Can you carry me?" "Yes," Ash said slowly. "But why?" Anne's mind was racing through possibilities. "The armies are coming because they think you are holding me prisoner. They think I need rescue. What if I go to them and tell them the truth?" "That would be too dangerous," Ash said immediately. "They might not believe you. They might think you are under a spell. Or they might listen," Anne argued. "I am Lord Richard's daughter. Some of those soldiers probably knew me before I came here. If they see me healthy and free, speaking in my own words, it might give them pause." Through the bond, Anne felt Ash's internal struggle. He wanted to protect her, but he also recognized the logic in her plan. The connection between them meant he could not hide his thoughts from her any more than she could hide hers from him. "If I refuse, you will try to do this anyway," Ash said. It was not a question. "Probably," Anne admitted. Ash stood and paced the room, his movements showing the agitation he felt. Finally, he turned back to her. "If we do this, we do it properly. You will ride with me in my true form. We will fly to the armies together, and I will be at your side every moment. At the first sign of danger, we leave." And felt relief flood through both sides of the bond. "Thank you for trusting me." "I trust you with my life," Ash said simply. The bond does not lie about such things. 2 days later, Anne stood on the high platform where dragons launched themselves into flight. Her shoulder was healed enough for travel, and she wore practical riding clothes designed for the intense wind of high-altitude flight. Beth had helped her prepare, securing straps and checking equipment. "Are you sure about this?" Beth asked quietly. "No," Anne said honestly, "but I have to try." Ash stood at the edge of the platform in his true form, and Anne was reminded of how magnificent dragons truly were. He was massive, easily the size of her father's manor house, with scales that shimmered black and deep red like cooling lava. His wings stretched wide, and when he moved, power rippled through every line of his body. Anne climbed onto his back, securing herself with the special harness that had been designed for her. She could feel Ash's presence in her mind through the bond, steady and reassuring. "Hold tight," Ash's voice echoed in her thoughts. "And do not look down if heights frighten you." "I am not afraid," Anne replied through the bond. "Not when I am with you." Ash launched himself from the platform, and Anne felt her stomach drop as they fell toward the ground before his wings caught the air. Then they were rising, climbing higher and higher until the ashen hold became small below them. The wind roared past, but Anne felt exhilarated rather than frightened. Flying was freedom in its purest form. They flew for hours, following reports from dragon scouts about the location of the human armies. As they drew closer, Anne saw the massive encampment spread across a valley. Thousands of tents, siege equipment, and supply wagons. 3 separate armies flying different kingdom banners, all united against a common enemy. "They have no idea what they are facing," Ash said through the bond. "If they attack the Ashen Hold, dragons will defend our home. Many humans will die. Then we make sure they do not attack," Anne said. Ash circled lower, and Anne saw soldiers pointing up at them. Horns began to blow, calling troops to arms. The armies thought they were under attack. "Take me to the center of their camp," Anne said. "Land where everyone can see us." "This is madness," Ash replied, but Anne felt his acceptance through the bond. He would follow her lead because he trusted her judgment. They descended toward the valley, and Anne prepared herself to face 3 armies. Somewhere down there, her father was watching. Somewhere in those camps were men ready to die to rescue her. She had to make them understand that she did not need rescuing. She needed them to open their eyes and see the truth. Arrows filled the sky like a swarm of angry insects. Ash twisted mid-her, his massive body shielding Anne from the projectiles that bounced harmlessly off his scales, and held tight to the harness as they descended toward the center of the human encampment, where 3 kings stood surrounded by their commanders. "Hold your fire!" a voice bellowed across the camp. "There's a rider on the dragon's back." Ash landed with earth-shaking force in the middle of the valley. Soldiers scrambled backward, weapons raised but uncertain. Anne could feel Ash's protective fury through the bond. He wanted to burn anyone who threatened her, but he held himself perfectly still, trusting her plan, and unstrapped herself from the harness and slid down Ash's side to stand on the ground. Her leg was steady thanks to the brace the dragon healers had made, and she walked forward without hesitation. Thousands of eyes watched her every move. "I am Anne Brennan," she called out, her voice carrying across the unnatural silence. "Daughter of Lord Richard Brennan, sent as tribute to the Dragon Lord 3 months ago. I am here to tell you that everything you have been told is a lie." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Soldiers looked at each other in confusion. In the distance, Anne saw her father pushing through the ranks, his face twisted with rage. King Henry of Rothdale stepped forward, a tall man with iron-gray hair and shrewd eyes. "Lady Anne, we have come to rescue you from captivity. If you are under the dragon's control, speak freely and we will protect you." "I am not under anyone's control," Anne said firmly. "I am exactly where I choose to be." Lord Richard finally reached the front of the crowd. "She is enchanted. Dragons have corrupted her mind with their magic. We must take her by force if necessary." And turned to face her father, and through the bond she drew on Ash's strength. "You sent me away hoping I would die. You called me cursed and broken. You treated me like I was worthless every day of my life. And now you claim to care about my welfare?" The accusation hung in the air. Some of the soldiers looked uncomfortable. They could hear the pain and truth in Anne's words. "She is my daughter," Lord Richard insisted. "I have every right to protect her from these creatures." "I needed protection from you, not from dragons," Anne said. "In 3 months at the Ashen Hold, I have been treated with more kindness and respect than in 17 years in your house." And turned to address the assembled armies, making sure her voice reached as many soldiers as possible. "The Dragon Lord never demanded tribute. That was human law, created by human kings after a war they started. Dragons accepted the treaty to prevent more bloodshed, not because they wanted human sacrifices." "Lies!" Lord Richard shouted. Everyone knows dragons are monsters. Then why am I alive? Anne asked. Why are all the previous tribute women alive? Some married and returned to human lands with great wealth. Others chose to stay and work in dragon society. Not one was harmed, not one was enslaved. We were all given a choice. King Henry studied Anne carefully. If what you say is true, why do the dragons live in isolation? Why not trade with human kingdoms? Because human kingdoms have been hostile, Anne said. But that can change. Lord Ashe has proposed a treaty that would benefit everyone. Dragons have knowledge of medicine, architecture, and metalwork that could improve human lives. Humans have agricultural techniques and philosophical ideas that interest dragons. We could help each other instead of fighting. Another king stepped forward, younger with a cautious expression. And what of you, Lady Anne? What is your position in this dragon stronghold? And felt the bond pulse with warmth. This was the moment that would define everything. She could hide the truth and maybe convince them to stand down, or she could be honest and risk everything. I am soul bonded to Lord Ashe, Anne said clearly. We are mated according to dragon law. The bond cannot be faked or forced. It forms only between souls that are perfectly matched. Gasps and shouts erupted from the soldiers. Lord Richard looked like he might collapse. King Henry's eyes widened with genuine shock. A human and a dragon? King Henry said slowly. That is unheard of. It has not happened in 1,000 years, Anne agreed. But it has happened now. I love Ashe and he loves me. Through our bond, I can feel his thoughts and emotions. I know his true heart, and there is no deception in him. Dragons are not monsters, they are just different from us. Behind Anne, Ashe shifted into his humanoid form. He walked forward to stand beside her, and Anne felt his hand rest gently on her shoulder. The gesture was protective but not controlling. Anne speaks the truth, Ashe said, his voice carrying to every corner of the valley. I offer the human kingdoms a choice. We can be enemies and shed blood over lies and fear, or we can be allies and build something better than what existed before. King Henry looked between Anne and Ashe, then at the armies surrounding them. Anne could see him calculating options. Finally he spoke. I would see proof of this treaty you propose. If dragons truly wish for peace, show us. Come to the Ashen Hold, Anne said. Bring your advisors and see our society for yourselves. I will give you a tour personally. Judge, with your own eyes, whether dragons are monsters or potential partners? The young king nodded slowly. I would accept this offer. My kingdom has lost too many sons to pointless wars. One by one, the other kings agreed, though Lord Richard protested loudly. He had lost everything in this confrontation. His lies were exposed, his daughter was forever beyond his control, and his political enemies had seized an advantage he could not counter. You are a fool, Lord Richard spat at Anne. You have thrown away your humanity for a monster. Anne looked at her father with pity rather than anger. I have not thrown away anything. I found myself in a place where I was allowed to be whole. You never gave me that chance. Ashe's hand tightened on her shoulder, and through the bond, Anne felt his pride and love. They stood together before 3 armies, 2 souls perfectly matched, bridging the gap between species through understanding rather than fear. 5 years later, Anne stood on a balcony overlooking the valley that had once held hostile armies. Now it held a mixed community where humans and dragons lived side by side. The Academy of Shared Knowledge rose from the valley floor, its towers reaching toward the sky. Students of both species studied together, learning from each other's strengths. Anne ran the academy alongside Beth, and their work had transformed relations between dragons and humans. Trade flourished. Medical advances saved thousands of lives. Architecture that combined human artistry with dragon. Engineering created wonders that neither species could achieve alone. Her legs still required the brace, but Anne had long since stopped thinking of it as a weakness. It was simply part of who she was, like her brown hair or her skill with languages. Ashe had taught her that worth was not measured by physical perfection, but by character and contribution. Ashe joined her on the balcony, wrapping his arms around her waist. Through the bond, Anne felt his contentment and peace. They had built something remarkable together, something that would outlast both of them. "Do you ever regret it?" Ash asked quietly. "Leaving your human life behind?" And leaned back against him, smiling. "I never left my human life behind. I just found a bigger world than the one I was born into." Below them, a group of young dragons and human children played together, their laughter rising through the evening air. This was the future they had fought for, a future where species boundaries mattered less than shared dreams. Anne had been sent as tribute, shunned and rejected by her own family, but she had found something better than acceptance. She had found love, purpose, and a place where she was cherished exactly as she was. The Dragon Lord had seen value where others saw only flaws, and together they had changed the world.